Hi and welcome to the second video in this series on making a dungeon from scratch using MakeTile. By the end of the first video we'd created all of the tiles you can see on the screen before you. The only thing I've done since then is I've duplicated some of them and moved them around to fill in the gaps so I can see what my dungeon looks like. So I said at the end of the last video that I was going to show you how to make this throne room or altar room, and it's this plinth fancier and to add different patterns and stuff to it. So by the end of this video what we'll have is we will have a plinth which once Cycles is updated, which will look something like this. So it's going to have some nice sort of star and hexagon tiles on the top and a sort of a zigzag bits and yeah, some sort of stone blocks on the vertical bits of the steps. Right, so let's go over to a new file and get started. Okay, so in order to do this, I'm going to start from an empty file, and the reason for that is we're going to be creating some fairly big meshes at various points, and I don't want to have other stuff hanging about in the scene, sort of slowing Blender down as well. Before I get started, I'm going to change a couple of options in Blender. Now, like I say, we're going to be dealing with some big meshes, and this means I'm going to have to temporarily sort of reduce the number of undo steps and stuff in Blender. So this is usually 32. And the memory limit is usually 0, which is actually unlimited. So I'm just going to make sure that that's down to 8 and that the memory limit is down to just a couple of gigabytes. And the reason for doing this is that when Blender is doing its sort of undo thing, it saves an entire copy of the scene into memory, and that can just slow things down an awful lot when you're dealing with big scenes. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off autosave. So in save and load, I've just got that turned off because I don't want Blender sort of writing out a file every couple of minutes or whatever, because at various points this file is going to be, you know, a few gigabytes in size, and if I have to wait for Blender to write that out, even if it's after 10 minutes or whatever, it's just going to slow everything down. Okay, so it should have save preferences on, or auto save preferences on. If not, just make sure you click on save preferences and then close that down. Right, so I'm going to start out by turning on my snap to increment and absolute grid snap and making sure that the move and rotate are both selected. I'm going to go into top view. I'm going to click and drag to select everything. And then in my MakeTile menu, I'm going to start out by creating two tile bases which don't have anything on them. So I'm going to start by going custom. The tile type for the front bit is going to be a semicircular floor. I want the base to be open lock, but I don't want there to be any main bit of the tile, so I'm turning the main system to none. The radius is going to be 3 and positive curve type, etc, etc. That's all fine. I'm just going to rotate that round by 90 degrees. And what this is it's a tile which just doesn't have a textured bit on, so there's nothing to make 3D or whatever. So that option isn't going to appear in this menu. And do the same thing for the 3x3 sort of back bit of our little plinth. So that's going to be a rectangular floor, and it's going to be 3x3. Right. So what I want to do is, first of all, I'm going to create sort of the first step on both of these tiles, and what I want there to be is a step here which has got a separate vertical and horizontal bit to it. So I'm going to start out by creating a curved wall. This time the base type is going to be none, And the main system is going to be plain because I don't want any extra sockets or anything popping up on it. The wall inner radius is going to be 2.5, which means it's going to start there. And degrees of arc 90, and then the wall thickness, the Y, is going to be 0.4, and the height is going to be 0.3. So by default, these open lock tiles are 0.3 inches high. So I want sort of the extra step to be another 0.3 inches high. Right, so I'm just going to press Tab to go into edit mode with this tile selected, and I'm just going to select a vertex in this corner, and then I'm going to press Shift and S and snap the cursor to selected, and that means that when I create my tile it's going to be made in the right place. So I'm going to make this curved wall, I'm going to rotate it around by 90 degrees. And the reason that I've made this 0.4 inches wide rather than 0.5 inches is because this is going to have a brick texture on it. So I'm just going to change that over to bricks. And if I switch over to the Cycles render engine, you can see that the brick texture is projecting out. I only want it to go up to the edge of the base. I don't want it to go beyond that, which is why I've only made it 0.4 inches rather than 0.5 inches wide. Now, like we saw in the previous video, we've got this issue with this texture because this has been rotated. So I'm just going to go down to material mapping, and I'm going to select an unrotated object, in this case this back tile, as my reference object. And that's going to make sure that that material displays correctly. I'm also going to take the brick material off the back here, because that's going to be filled up with another bit of tile. So I'm just going to click on back textured area, and I'm going to click on remove material. Oops, looks like it's actually the front. So I'm going to assign that to that, and click on remove material there. And there we go. Right, I'm just going to go back to my ordinary viewport shader so everything's nice and fast. So I want to fill up this little bit here just with sort of a plain base which doesn't have any texture on it. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to go to semicircular floor. I'm going to change the base type to plain, the main system to none, and I'm going to change the base height up to 0.3. Tile height will be 0.3 anyway, and I want this to be 2.5 inches base radius. Okay, I'm just going to make that, I'm going to rotate that around. Okay, so I'm going to just select this bit, this new tile I've created, and select that vertex, and press Shift and S again, and snap the cursor to selected so the next bits are made in the right place. So now I want to make a curved floor to go on top of this. So I'm going to go up here, going to go to curved floor. I'm going to have the Z height as 0.01 in this case. I'm going to have the base type being none this time, main system being plain, and then the floor thickness is going to be 0.5. I'm going to just change that main material to just to start with to floor tiles, and rotate that around. Oops. Okay, so we've now created our little floor tile material which sits on top of the wall bit, and I'm going to do the same thing here for this bit. So I'm going to change that to no base and a plain system. I'm going to have the tile height again 0.01, and I'm just going to turn the base radius down to 2.48. And the reason for that is that I want there to be a little gap between this bit of the tile and that bit of the tile, which is why I've created this as a separate sort of top to this corner bit of the this inner bit of the tile. So I'm just going to click on MakeTile and rotate that around. And if I now switch over to cycles and have a look at what we've got, cycles. You can see that we've got the sort of gap between these two areas of the tile, and I'm going to have these as two different bits of material, two different types of material, which is why I want that extra gap there. Okay, so I'm now going to just make sure that I've snapped my cursor to the top of this bit. So there we go. And then I'm just going to add in another step. So I'm going to start with this bit, and just clicking on it will bring up the settings which were used to create that tile. So all I want to do is I want to turn that down to 1.5 for the inner radius. I'm just going to switch that on to brick so it automatically creates them with the right material. So I'm going to rotate that around by 90. And then I want to do the same with this bit, which is going to be 1.5. Tab into edit mode, select this vertex, and select that, and change that again to 1.5. Make sure that that's on floor tiles. Rotate that around. And then last bit, do the same with that. So that's going to be 1.48 in this case. Okay, so that's the sort of the geometry of this bit's done. So I'm just going to do the same over here. So to start with, I want to create a straight wall bit. So I'm just going to snap my cursor over to here to make sure that I'm starting on the right level. And I want to go to straight wall, and I want this to be no open lock, no base, a plain vertical bit. So X is going to be 3, Y is going to be 0.4, Z is going to be 0.3. There we go. And let's just grab that, move it along there. Okay, and now I want to do a rectangular sort of floor bit here. So I'm just going to tab into edit mode and snap my cursor to select it there, because I know that this is going to create a floor which is in the, that's going to be the center. Still going to be slightly in the wrong place, but it's close enough. So rectangular floor base type is going to be plain. Main system is going to be none. X is going to be 2.5. Y is going to be 3. Z is going to be 0.3. And grab X. There we go. Make sure that's all in the right place. Yes. And just going to snap my cursor to this point and make a floor, straight floor. That'll be 0.01. It's going to be 0.5. That's going to be 3. Main system plane. And that's going to be floor tiles. In the right place. Yeah, that's in the right place. And then cursor to selected, and I want this to be a rectangular floor base type none, main system plane, and I want that to be 2.48, so I get this little gappy thing, and I want that to be 0.01 tile. Okay, just move it along ever so slightly so we're all lined up. Right, okay, now I just want to do the same for the next step. So I'm going to go 2, 3, 4, cursor selected. I want it to be that type of tile, and I want it to be 1.5. And move that along to there. Yep. And then I want it to be this type of tile. It's going to be exactly the same size, isn't it? So okay, and then make sure I'm in the right place with my cursor. It's going to be exactly the same size as that. And grab that, move it along to the X. And I want this bit to be 1.48, don't I? Okay. Okay, so that's the geometry of my two tiles created. So yes, that's all fine. I'm just checking to see whether there's any sort of gaps in between our tiles, because if there is, then when it comes to print it out, obviously it'll want to print it out as two sort of sections, and I don't want that. So I'm going to go on to the viewport shading. I'm just going to quickly save everything. Where are we? Layout video, and I'm going to call this plinth 1. Plinth 1. Having issues with the whole typing thing today. So these vertical bits are going to be bricks, so I'm just going to select that one and then that one and go Control and L and link my materials, so they're all on bricks. This bit and this bit and this bit and this bit are going to have a zigzag material apply to them. So I'm going to go down here to select that, floor tiles, and down here we've got sawtooth. And I'm just going to link those two together. Actually, I'm just going to link these all together. Right, okay, so this sawtooth material. If I click Make 3D with this curved bit selected, then what you can see is that the material changes into this kind of sawtooth material. I'm going to ignore this little bit over here for now. And if I do the same thing on here, it should pretty much do the same thing. Yeah, so it's gonna change into this correct sawtooth material, which is what I want. Now the reason why it's not displaying properly to start with is because when Blender is baking this texture, when it's doing a sort of a render of this texture, which it then uses to distort the geometry underneath, when we make something 3D, what it's seeing is it's seeing this curvy wall bit without what's called a deform modifier applied to it. So if I press tab to go into edit mode with one of these curved walls selected, or curved floors selected, you can see that the geometry is actually a straight wall tile which has been subdivided so it fits around a curve. So if I go over here with one of these tiles selected and click on the little spanner icon, at the top of this modifier stack is this bend modifier here, a simple deform modifier. Where are we? And here we've got two options, one of which is display it in viewports, which is the second one. If I turn that off, it stops applying, Blender stops applying this modifier in the viewports, and you can see this is what Blender is kind of seeing at the start. Now next to that option is this one, which is use this modifier during render, and that's turned off by default on these curved tiles. So when Blender comes to render this texture, bake this texture, which it then uses to distort the underlying geometry when we make stuff 3D, this is what it's seeing. It's seeing this object without this modifier applied, which is why when we do make something 3D, it changes from looking like this to looking like this. Unfortunately, there's no way of me showing it like this in the viewport as a preview, whilst also showing that it's curved, which are just one of those sort of funny little limitations. So sometimes it's worth with these textures, if it's something like a sawtooth modifier or whatever, or if you're making your own, to remember that you can change whether or not a texture is displayed when it bakes, and so you can actually wrap textures around, but you can't necessarily see that in the preview. I'll sort of explore this a bit further in a future video, but for now that's why these sawtooth textures just look a bit weird. So I'm going to turn that back on. I'm going to select this and return to preview, so that I'm not filling up my scene with big meshes. And I'm going to select this one because obviously this one it's not quite in the right place. This is nothing to do with the mesh, it's just to do with the texture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the sawtooth material. I'm going to change that, which is the one which is applied to it at the moment, to this new sawtooth one, and I'm just going to get rid of that out of the material slot, and I'm just going to do the control and link materials thing. So I just want to tweak the material on this these straight bits so that they fill up the entire width of the tile. So I'm just going to go down to my material options and my scale. So I've obviously been playing about with this when I was getting it to fit that bit of tiles. So what happens if I turn it down to 0.7 on the X? Yeah, so that fits. That makes that fit. Right. So I'm just going to quickly make those 3D just to check that they do line up properly. And yeah, that's fine. I'll worry about this pixelation issue in a bit. For now I'm just making sure that everything lines up. Right, okay, so I'm just going to return to preview. Oh, haven't done that for multiple objects yet, looks like. Right, preview, return to preview, and return to preview. Okay, so for these top bits, what I want is a sort of a fancy pattern texture on it, and I'm going to use that. I'm going to do that by using an image or a height map in a custom image texture. So I'm going to first of all, I'm just going to select this, and I'm going to click on my floor tiles material, and I'm going to go down to custom image. It's going to go blank. I'm just going to do my material linking thing, pressing Control and L. I've got materials, and what this custom image material does or has is if you look in the material options, it's got this little custom image thing, and what this allows us to do is it allows us to find a height map in our on our computer, and I'll go into what that is in a sec. And we can take that height map and we can apply it to a texture, so that we can then take whatever image we've chosen and turn it into a displacement texture like this. So I need to just adjust the way that this material is mapped. So I need to make sure that is on object. And yeah, that's fine. And then I need to adjust the scale on it. So I'm going to scale that down to 0.25. And reducing the scale in Blender makes things bigger, because that's weird and logical. And then I'm just going to choose one of these as my reference object, so that it tiles all the way across, and these match up when we print them out. Right, so the last thing I'm going to do for this particular image texture is I'm going to come down here and I'm going to turn the contrast up from 0 to 0.99, which is going to make it really contrasty, the image which is behind it. And then I'm going to turn my strength here up to 10. This will make this, when it appears in Eevee, kind of look very similar in its sort of contrast to this. So I know that when I make this 3D, it's going to sort of be similar in its in the amount it projects to my other textures. So I'm just going to make this 3D on just this little bit of the tile, and you can see that's what it looks like. So I'm just going to whack that up to 7 to get rid of a bit of the pixelation, So yeah, so we've got this nice material here which we've made from a texture. So where did I get this texture from, and what do I mean when I talk about height maps and stuff like that? So I'm just going to launch Chrome, and I am going to go to where is it? It's .me, textures.me, 3dtextures.me. So this is a website run by a guy who has a load of free textures, and I'm just using these. I can't remember what the license actually is, so I'm just using these to show you. Each of these textures is a PBR texture, and it's got several images in it. So PBR means physically based rendering, and as well as having a sort of a color texture, it also has normals and height maps and stuff. So I'm just going to wait for it to load up. My computer is going, my internet is incredibly slow today. So if I go over to one of the textures and I click on the download all maps thing, it'll take you to a Google Drive, or on some of them it'll take you to a different hosting. And you'll see that there's several different images here. So we have a sort of a base color, and then we've got this height map, which is the one we're going to use. And then we've got normal maps, opacity maps, ambient occlusion maps, leather weave, roughness map, that is. But what we want is we want a height map or a displacement map, depending on which program people are using. They're basically the same thing. And this is a black and white texture. as you can see. Basically what it means is that for our purposes, when we use this, the white bits will be the highest points, which are used for displacement. The black bits will be the lowest points, and the grey bits will, obviously be in between. So I haven't tried using this one, but this looks like a really interesting texture, so I'm just going to download that. I'm gonna save that, not in my invoices folder, but in I've got textures popping up at the moment. No, so it's going to be E textures, 3dtextures.me leatherweave height map. Okay. And so I'm just going to load that new texture which we've just downloaded into this. And where are we? Material options. Oh, sorry, need to return to preview. And material options, custom image. Let's open this leather weave. No idea what this will look like. So that's way too big, isn't it? So I'm going to just turn the scale back to its normal one, and contrast. Turn the contrast down in this case. Probably turn the strength down to maybe 5, maybe 2. Let's scale that up to 0.5. Right, let's have a look at what this looks like if we make it 3D. This is going to look rather weird. It might look quite good, actually. Right, so that's way too strong. So return to preview. Strength 1. I even have to turn the strength out to 0.5 here, and click on Make 3D. Right, so I mean this isn't probably that appropriate for our uses, but I just thought it was a quite cool looking texture. So you can take any height map, any black and white image, and use it on this with this custom image texture. So, and then it will just apply it like this. Right, okay, so this is what pretty much I want my plinth to look like. I'm just going to do a slight tweak to this bricks material so that the bricks fill up the entire vertical bit of the step. So that's going to be where are we? Height is going to be 0.15. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. So they now fill up everything. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly save this, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of these and just export them and voxelize them as we have done in the past. And then once I've done that, I'm then going to import them into another file, and I'm going to join them all together. There's a couple of different ways that you can go about sort of this whole joining multiple bits into a single tile. This is one I found which is least frustrating, and the reason I'm doing it this way, exporting everything out and then joining tiles together, is just because if I make all of these 3D, they're going to end up as absolutely huge files knocking about in our scene, and stuff can slow down and it can crash and whatever. I just don't want to do that. So I'm going to make sure that our subdivision's up here 8, which is higher than we've used in the past, and that's because there's quite a lot of detail in these little tiles, and also these tiles are a bit bigger than the ones we've used previously. So this is this is 3 by 3 or 2.5 by 3, and it just means that you need more subdivisions to capture all the detail. Right, so I'm just going to go down here and I'm going to make sure that voxelize is selected. I'm going to choose a different folder. going to be MakeTiles to plinth 3. And I'm going to export this, and then it's going to be the usual thing of going and having a cup of tea and waiting for everything to export out. So I'll see you shortly. Okay, so after the usual long wait, everything's exported out. I'm just going to save this file, and then I'm going to go into a new one. If you look down here, you'll see that Blender has started to use an enormous amount of memory. So we're on 12.7 gigabytes or something ridiculous. This is to do with Blender's undo system, basically. So I'm going to create a new file. And I'm going to load back in the plinth file we had, which I saved a moment ago, and we're now back to 409 megabytes, which is much more sane. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to create a new scene. So I'm going to go up here, create new scene, and I'm just going to import in all of those plinth objects which I exported a moment ago. So it's all of these. I'm just going to press Control and A. Oh, that doesn't appear to work anymore. I'm just going to press A to select all of those. I'm going to click on Import STL. Right, so here I've got my my exported voxelized tiles. And what I want to do is I want to merge these together. So I want this to be one tile, and I want this to be one tile. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to join them together. So I'm just going to select all of them, and I'm going to press Control and J. And that's going to join all of these objects together. And I'm going to do the same with this front tile. I'm going to press Control and J. Oops. Make sure that I've got one of them selected first. Control J. So that's all of those selected. If I tab into edit mode though, we can see, if I just select, say, that bit, these are still separate meshes. This would actually print out fine in the vast majority of slicer programs, but just for sort of neatness' sake, I'm going to sort of revoxelize this. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to go down to my voxelize settings, and because everything has been sort of massively scaled up during the export when we converted from Blender units to inches, I'm going to multiply this by 10. So I'm going to have that as 0.1, and the adaptivity is going to be 0.5. I'm just going to click off merge because we've only got one object selected. I'm going to click on voxelize objects, and that's joined everything together and voxelized it all. So you can see that it's now a single mesh. So I'm going to do the same thing on that one. Okay, and now what I need to do is I need to export them, but for the moment I can't actually export through this bit because I realised while I was making this video that I don't currently have an option in here to sort of not change the scale. So I will add in an option which is a sort of a don't change scale on export option. So I'm just going to export them using sort of the default STL exporter. So I'm just going to select both of them. File, export, STL. I'm going to go batch mode object, which just means it's going to save out each of these individual objects as separate files, which is what we want for when we print them out. And then I'm going to go to wherever it is that I have been saving things, which is here. And I'm just going to include selection only. STL. Okay, and they've now been just saved out. Right, so that's our plinth done for printing. What I'll do is I will, when I come to the next video, I'll just scale these down again, as it were, and import them back into the original file for the next bit. And the next bit of the video of this series is going to be on sort of adding extra objects to tiles. So we're going to add a couple of doorways to some of our tiles, and then we're going to add some things like torches to some of the walls, and maybe some, I don't know, banners or whatever. Basically, I'll show you how to do a bit of kit bashing in Blender with these tiles which you've generated. Okay, so that's everything, and I shall see you again soon. Bye for now.